the National Teacher Walkout, involving over 25,000 teachers, a 9-day strike where teachers argued for an increase in pay and a better insurance program. It left 250,000 students without an education for those 9 days. The National School Walkout, involving over 1 million participants, a 17-minute protest in terms to protest school violence. The students received threats of being expelled and suspended. The adults received a 5% pay raise. This is discrimination. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Connor Darwish, and when analyzing the research question, how are the limitation of students' rights an illustration of the First Amendment in U.S. public schools, I came with the answer and the argumentation that the limitation of students' First Amendment rights in public schools illustrates that minors are being discriminated against. And when analyzing this argumentation, I first had to ask, what is discrimination? Well, discrimination is the unjust treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, sex, and most especially in this case, age. But first, we have to look at what the First Amendment is and what it guarantees to its citizens. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion, speech, press, to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government. Looking forward, in the case of Hazelwood versus Kohlmeyer, we could see the first case of student discrimination, where the court had to argue the question, did the principal's deletion of articles violate the student's right under the First Amendment when a set of students published an article about an issue and the principal retracted it due to his belief that it was inappropriate? The court ruled in a 5-3 decision for the Hazelwood School District that they had this right. But more notably, we have to look at the court's opinion in exactly what they said. The court held that schools must be able to set high standards for student speech. They then went on to say that schools retain the right to refuse to sponsor speech that was inconsistent with the shared values of civilized social order. This becomes discrimination as it is only based upon the fact of age, that civilized social order only exists between adults and not between minors. We can see this in modern day times and from a big perspective on a national scale with the teacher protests and the National School Walkout. CNN, a reliable article, posted that after 9 days of striking, teachers agreed to a 5% raise for teachers, and the governor also issued an executive order aimed at creating long-term revenue to fix public employees' insurance program. This is significant because it came from a protest. When they left their jobs and left over 250,000 students without an education, they did not receive punishment because it was guaranteed under their First Amendment. They instead received incentive and reward. Rather, when we look at the students' protest in Vox magazine, we can see a superintendent and many superintendents who say, and I quote, "Should students choose to do so, they will be suspended from school for 3 days and face all the consequences that come along with an out-of-school suspension. Life is all about choices, and every choice has a consequence." This is discrimination because he's only basing this fact upon age. So, if a student wants to peaceably assemble and protest, even just for 7 minutes, they receive threats and punishment, but the adults receive incentive, just based on age, which applies under discrimination. We can further see a contradiction to that superintendent saying in the Tinker versus Des Moines case, where they argued a question, does a prohibition against the wearing of armbands in public schools as a form of symbolic protest violate the students' freedom of speech protections guaranteed by the First Amendment? This case can be used in favor that they are not being discriminated against, but it's actually not being listened to, as we can see in modern day protests, because the court in a 7-2 decision ruled with Tinker. But most supporters that say that these teenagers and these minors aren't being discriminated against and that they aren't guaranteed the First Amendment follow Justice Potter Stewart, who wrote in his opinion on the Tinker v. Des Moines case that children are not necessarily guaranteed the full extent of the First Amendment rights. That's it. That is all he said on the issue of children and minors being guaranteed the First Amendment. As he provides no real legal opinion, we have to assume that it's only based upon the fact that they are a minor and based on age, falling under the discrimination clause. Now, as we look towards a solution for this problem, minors must look towards anti-discrimination laws and file that any limitations of the First Amendment in public schools is and will always be discrimination, and they must pursue legislation with their senators and local elected official government leaders to pursue these anti-discrimination laws. Thank you. What questions do you have?
All right, 2 questions. First question, what evidence did you gather that you did not use, and then why didn't you use it?
I gathered more evidence that shows superintendents threatening and punishing students to support my argumentation. And I did not use it because I wanted to provide both perspectives, that of the adults and that of the students. And I thought it would have been overkill in my argument if I provided both sides.
Okay, and next question. What additional questions emerged from your research?
Well, when I first began my initial research, it was the First Amendment and that students aren't guaranteed it. But the question of discrimination and are we allowing discrimination in public schools came from my research. And why are we allowing discrimination as I continued the discrimination argumentation?
And you were done.